It is now time to head in here to Pool C or Group C, whichever you really call it. We're going to be talking about Pool C, my predictions for this particular group. If you guys have missed previous iterations of my predictions for MLG Atlanta, you guys can feel free to check out Pool A and Pool B. Links will be in the description if you guys want to kind of go in a little bit of an order. And also, I'm going to try to do my best to put timestamps when I talk about each individual team. So if you want to see me talk about Cloud9 and Team 3G specifically, you guys can go to the description and see my timestamps for both of those. So let's go and hop into it. Like I said, it's going to be Pool C that we're going to be discussing here in this particular video. And in this pool, we're going to be having Cloud9, Elevate EU, Luminosity, Team 3G, and obviously an open bracket team. Yes, Cloud9. First thing I think of when I think of Cloud9 is a solid group of guys, solid group of players who know their role. This is a team to me who, out of all the teams that we can talk about, this team to me knows their role better than any other team. They know exactly what they're going to do when it comes down to each map. They know exactly what their design position is to do, and it's so apparent that anyone who watches their gameplay can kind of realize that every team coming into a match versus Cloud9 knows exactly what they're going to do, but for some reason, a lot of them struggle. So their exact roles, what they're going to do throughout the entirety of each game mode. Ricky, the hardcore support. Ricky has been known as the guy to do the dirty work. So rarely do you ever see anyone in the history of Call of Duty esports who is willing to give up credibility as a player, give up roster spots because of their KD, that they didn't have the greatest KD in the world. And people are starting to kind of realize that over the last few years. And it's been something that he's been doing his entire career, has been kind of settling himself and being willing to do what is not always wanted to. And that is, to me, the reason why Ricky is one of the greatest players that we've ever had in Call of Duty esports history, is because of that exact reason. The guy who is willing to do everything the other team doesn't want to do. He's willing to sacrifice his kills to do the objective work. He's also a very talented S&D player at that and can get selling done whenever he needs to. Next player we have is going to be Aches, who is the in-game leader and also a role that I like to call the lurker. Basically, this is a role that I've personally designated to Mr. Patrick Price. Because if you do look at certain events, if you look at like a display of what players have done at different times, you're going to have, obviously, like I said, Ricky doing the hardcore support, Lacefield and Assault doing their slaying role, which I get to them. But what does Aches do, right? What is Aches' role to do? Besides, being the captain. Basically, he is the in-game leader for this team, meaning that he is kind of prepping them for different teams. They're trying to be aware of who they're facing off against. And the reason why I give him the lurker role is because in CSGO, there's a role known as the lurker. The lurker, basically, his entire mentality is to kind of be aware of support. He's not really a support player. He can kind of be defined as that to me in COD, is my made-up lurker role. There's only, to me, a few players who have this kind of same skill that Aches does, is that during a game, he's kind of learning about them as it goes on. A lot of guys will just kind of realize, they were doing this. This is the one mistake we made. But it's like, this is the reason why we made the mistake. This is how it happened. This is when it happened. And this is who made the mistake. So on a stat line, you might not be seeing what he's doing, but that's not how he gets his worth out of a roster. That's not how he gets his worth out of a team. His worth comes from the stuff that doesn't show up on the stat line, which I think is difficult to find. It's obviously difficult to kind of credit someone like that if you're just looking at the scoreboard. If you're just looking at what you see maybe on the caster mode, you see someone winning a gunfight, like, oh, he's the best player on the team. What is Aches doing? He's -3. It only has like a minute, or not even a minute, like 45 seconds in the hill or something like that. So like I said, it's a role that I think needs to be filled by someone, and I think with how the current lineup of this team works, they're kind of, to me, different than a lot of other teams are, and I think that a lot of other teams need to kind of adapt this same style of knowing their exact roles and doing that in every single game mode, not switching up payloads that often, or doing something like that. So next player we have is going to be Lacefield. Lacefield is basically the up-close, in-your-face Slayer. To me, was probably one of the best OSA players, which, granted, everyone was pretty good with the OSA, to be completely honest. I think everyone was an OSA player at one time. But before it was like known as being overpowered and before it was banned, he and Apathy, to me, had the fastest reaction times. They're probably the most upbeat players in your face at all times. There was a time in Season 2 of the Call of Duty World League, back at Black Ops 3, I believe he had the highest score per minute, I think, which just goes to show how much he's moving around the map, how much he's in your face, what he's doing with the objective. I think he was like in the top 20 for KD, Slayer ratio, objective, and search and destroy. And that's very, 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 very impressive to see, because he basically kind of does everything around the map. And kind of being that second hand with Ricky and kind of being along the line sides of Pat as well. So last player we have is going to be Assault, who is kind of like the anchor in some ways. I would say the anchor, along with kind of like a Slayer. Basically, he's going to be having the higher KDs on this team because he's going to have a limited amount of gunfights that he's in. To me, he is probably one of the best MV4 players we have in the game. His MV4 doesn't move. Granted, the MV4 doesn't really move at all anyway, but his shot is straight. It's kind of crazy to see when you watch Assault, and if you are an AR player, an MV4 player for a team, watch how Assault plays, because he, to me, plays like a classic AR player. I'm not sure how he's really developed into that. Whether that's been through Aches and Ricky kind of guiding him through that or whatever, I'm not sure. But he plays to me like a classic AR player. If I was like looking at his arrow on the minimap, I would be expecting that to be like a JCap or like a Slasher or old school Proofy or old school Glacier or something like that. Just because of the way that he plays is kind of like a old veteran style, which is to me something that's not really seen anymore. They had a really, really good run in MLG Vegas actually. One thing they definitely struggled in was uplink. They started to turn up in uplinks toward the end of the tournament, which is kind of unfortunate because that's when they ended up losing. They were forced into constant game 5s. I casted over, I think, every single C9 match in pool play. And it was fun to see game 5s. It was just like, how does this keep happening? Like, how in the world does C9 continually get into these game 5 situations and win them? Like, they just kept winning them. I think the only match they lost in pool play was to TK, and I believe they got reverse swept in that one. I think they later reverse swept Echo Fox in game 5, and they might have reverse swept Splice. I'm not 100% sure. I just know it went to game 5, and they also beat them, which was a huge matchup to see C9 versus Splice, and they ended up clutching that one out. Later on in the winners bracket, they ended up beating Elevate EU also in Game 5. Then later also beat Allegiance in Game 5. So they were kind of being the roamers throughout the winners bracket until they actually lost to Rise in the winners finals, and I think that was 3-1. So of course they ended up losing that uplink, and they ended up losing one of their earlier game types, which had that not gone their way, they could have maybe even beat Rise Nation and been in a great situation to go into the grand finals, being in winners. So you can kind of see like uplink continuing to be an issue for them. They also ended up beating FaZe in Game 5 and later lost to Rise Nation in the grand finals. Like I said, I think their run definitely could have been a lot easier, to say the least, if they would have practiced more on their uplink game. And I don't know what it was, if it was just the mindset that they had coming into those Game 5s, or whether it was the guidance of having Aches and Ricky together or not. But something just happened. The younger players on this team, both being Assault and being Lacefield, to me, they have a lot of pressure on them kind of coming into just every tournament in general when it comes down to this lineup. Just because if they don't perform, that's kind of like how Cloud9 does, right? Because, I mean, Aches is going to kind of, like, maybe if he sees one of them struggling, he can maybe try to be more of a Slayer. But generally, the way that they won a lot of those games was having Assault and having Lacefield win those respawns, winning that one clutch respawn they had to at least have to move on, or maybe winning a hard point and stuff like that. So to me, if Cloud9 is not having them fire on all cylinders, then they are going to have a lot of issues. You'll see how Cloud9 does. There, to me, still a little bit of a question mark, because, was it just, when you look at the amount of Game 5s that they went to, a lot of the times, if it came down to a 1 versus 1 that could have gone a different way or something like that, they obviously could have had a completely different result if the odds wouldn't have been in their favor at that time. So we'll have to see how Cloud9 does. I still think they're going to be a very solid team coming into this event, and I'm very, very much looking forward to seeing the duo-ship of the Young Guns, both Assault and Lacefield, how they do. Next team we have in group, what is it, C? Yeah, it has to be C. Is going to be Elevate EU, which for those who don't know the roster, go and read it off for you guys, is going to be Watson, Shawnee, Reedy, and Zed. This team to me is definitely the third best team in Europe right now, right behind Orbit and Splice. They match up better versus Orbit, but they get wrecked by Splice, even though Orbit is better than Splice. Doesn't make sense, but it's how it goes, I guess. I'm not sure. At least in online play. Give you guys kind of a background as far as these players are considered. Reedy came from a year on Epsilon with Moose, Scraps, and Sunny B. Of course, Moose ends up going over to Infused, and Scraps and Sunny B end up going over with Tommy, and then Scraps' twin brother Wuskin over on Fnatic. Watson, after playing under Exertus and LDLC, believed he ended up getting released and kind of questioned a little bit during the year for his lack of preparation and kind of motivation at times, because he was supposed to be on a league team and stuff ended up happening, and then he was questioned for like his motivation in a game and stuff like that. To me, Watson is the key factor for this team. I'm already getting into it. I'll talk about Shawnee and Zed in a second. He is the main factor for this team, and there were times where I was casting over them at MLG Vegas, and the major downfall for the reason why they struggled at certain times was because he was not playing well. At G4D London, completely different story. Watson was the main Slayer throughout a majority of the time, and you saw them have a lot of success at that tournament, even placing top 3 at G4D London. So, in my opinion, for this team to have a lot of success, Watson has to be playing at a high level at all times. If he's, I want to see Watson in the top 10 KDs for day one, especially. Once day one is over, Watson top 10 KD, I'm expecting it. I want it to happen, because if not, I think that's where Elevate EU can definitely struggle. Next player that we have is going to be Zed, who played under XL or Hyper Games, kind of switched throughout the year. For Black Ops 3, but without question the star of the team, and to me is currently one of the better players that we have in Europe, or European Call of Duty. He was the star player when it came down to Hyper Games and XL. They were known as an online team throughout most of the year, and they didn't really have a whole lot of great results when it came down to LAN. They would beat some of the top teams in the game online, and then when it came down to LAN, those guys are like, where you at, man? Like, where's XL? Where's Hyper Games at? They're not really performing anymore. And I always thought that Zed kind of got a little bit of a bad rap, because I always thought that he played pretty consistently for the most part. And then we also have kind of a younger player, Shawnee. I believe he just turned I think he just turned the age of 18 as of like a few weeks before PSX or something like that. He's apparently a young rising star throughout EU, and we could see how he does at this tournament. I'm not familiar with him very much at all, just to be completely honest with you guys. All that I know is that he's a younger guy. Apparently, he's very well respected around the community, and obviously, I don't think Elevate EU would pick him up for no reason. So, like I said, I think Watson's a huge factor for this team's success when it comes down to this group. This is not an easy group to get out of by any means, and I think like any of the top 3 teams in this group, any of them can make it through. As far as their MLG Vegas run, they actually end up going through the open bracket, just like every other EU team had to do due to it being a regional. I believe they ended up beating their brothers on Infused and beating Lethal Gaming to, I believe, qualify for pool play. After making it out of their group, they ended up beating a lackluster Team Envious. They lost to C9, I believe, in Game 5. I think they ended up getting knocked out by OG 3-1 in losers, if I remember correctly. As far as their 2K performances, in some ways, every MLG 2K for Europe kind of has a consistent result, which means it goes normally Orbit, Splice, Elevate, Infused. Like I said, Elevate usually takes out Infused, Splice usually takes out Elevate, and then depending if Orbit can get past Supremacy or not, they end up winning the entire thing or facing off against Splice, which has only happened one time, sadly. But either Orbit or Splice usually ends up winning it. I believe this Elevate team has ended up losing to Splice twice in the grand finals of the 2K. So they've gotten 2 second places, which is pretty good. Obviously, whenever Orbit's not there, or if they get past Infused and whatnot. But I know I've talked about this quite a bit. But when it comes down to this group, they can't slack. They really can't. This isn't a group that's like, oh, okay, we can kind of coast to this one. We don't have to worry about one particular game or not. But I think if LA wants to succeed, if they want to make it through this group, they've got to heavily rely on both Watson and Zed. You're going to most likely see a pretty consistent performance from Reedy. You're going to see hopefully a good performance from Shawnee, the young gun. But Watson and Zed, these two need to be at a high level at all times during this tournament. We can't have Watson having a slow map. We can't have Zed, coasting a little bit here and there. We have to have them playing at a high level at all times, because if you get burned once, that could easily be what puts you apart and settles you down to losing and being placed in the losers bracket, which God knows you're not going to be put in the losers bracket at any time during this tournament. It's hell. It'll be hell, I promise. So now I talked about Elevate. We're now going to move on here to Luminosity Gaming. Luminosity Gaming, to be put it short and sweet, they've been lackluster so far in Infinite Warfare. I've not really been impressed with the roster move that has taken place as far as like how they perform post the roster move. And I expect to see maybe a little bit more slang improvements when it came down to the addition of Saints. And to be honest, I was thinking that this team is so well-versed as far as communication, as far as chemistry is concerned, that losing Looney won't really heavily affect their communication. However, though, once that roster change was made, right, for those who don't know, 3 out of the 4 of these players, being Slacked, being Classic, being Octane, they end up leaving Rise Nation throughout Black Ops 3. They end up leaving them heading into Infinite Warfare, They leave Looney to kind of fend for himself to find another 4, which he ends up finding the Elevate players, 3 of the 4 Elevate players. Like I said, in losing a player like Looney, they lost a lot of communication. And I noticed this early on in their team scrims when I was watching them. This is very, very early on in the game, maybe even before the weapon draft was taken out. You could definitely see like little, like maybe 5-10 second increments where nobody was talking whatsoever. Then someone would die. It's like, why is this not being called out? Like, what's going on here? You could see them having little instances where they were used to having Looney kind of be that mending force that kind of always had at least communication going in some way. And I think, while they lose communication with the departure of Looney, they also, I think, lost a little bit of discipline whenever they also lose Looney, because they gain chemistry with Saints without question because of how close those guys all are together. And they're all great slayers in their own regard. Like, to me, this is one of the most consistent teams, one of the most consistent lineups of this core group that Call of Duty has seen in a very, very long time. However, though, I think they lose a lot of their discipline because, granted, they might not have had the best chemistry with Looney, but they might have not had enough time to joke around because Looney was in the call with them or constantly around with them, that they might have focused on comms more, might have focused on strategies more because there wasn't time to have fun. Maybe there wasn't time to kind of fool around a little bit or anything like that, or maybe to not take it as serious because Looney was there. As far as MLG Vegas was considered, they ended up topping a very close group. They ended up beating Cole and EG, just talked about them a minute ago. They ended up losing a Game 5 to Rise in the winner's quarters, and ended up losing to ALG in Game 5, losers round 5 after beating Team Envious. So kind of unfortunate for them, kind of an unfortunate way to end it. Of course, like I said, they beat ALG, and then they later ended up getting beat by them, which is kind of unfortunate to say the least for Luminosity. But you do look at that, right? They lose a Game 5 to the team who ended up winning the entire tournament, and then they end up losing to a team who ended up placing top 4 in Game 5. So they lose to number 1 and number 4, both in Game 5s. To me, that just goes to show in some ways what could have been there, like one S&D map that decided their entirety of the game for them, the entirety of the tournament for them. So they might not have had as bad of a placement had those games gone their way. As far as MLG 2Ks are considered, of course, this is online. They've had basically, I think the highest placement they've had in a 2K is 3rd through 4th, which should be a lot higher for them in my opinion, especially with the amount that we've had. On December 11th, they ended up losing OG 3-1, which gave them a 9th through 16th placement. On January 8th, they ended up getting top 4, but lost to FaZe 3-0. January 15th, they placed top 16, losing to EU United in Game 5. January 22nd, they get 3rd through 4th, lose to Envy in Game 5. On January 29th, they end up getting top 16, losing to Panda Game 5. And then in their most recent 2K, which took place on the 4th of February, they ended up getting a top 8 placement, losing to TK in Game 5. Now, you notice a little bit of a pattern there kind of going on. Game 5, Game 5, Game 5, Game 5. 4 straight Game 5 losses in the last 4 2Ks is not something that's good to see for them. Now, I did a little bit of an analysis, kind of like a little bit of number crunching on some of the map pools that I think they might have had some issues on. And basically kind of what I figured out for the most part is as I went through each of their 2K losses, I looked at the maps that they lost, the scoring that they ended up losing to. Out of a lot of those maps, I did learn that Scorch is not a good map for them. Scorch Hardpoint is not a good matchup for them whatsoever. Scorch Hardpoint, they struggle quite a bit on. And then when it comes down to S&D, Retaliation, and Crusher, they're combined 0-7 on those in those 2K losses. Granted, those are losses, and those are against top teams. And some of those top teams, they're going to be facing off against in this tournament. So if you see them on Retaliation or Crusher, or you see them on Scorch when it comes into Hardpoint, it's not going to be a good time for them. And also, their uplink throwback is not great either. So, like I said, it's going to rely, unfortunately, on some randomness to see how those pools get decided, like what maps are going to be playing in pool play, which is kind of unfortunate. I hate that that's the case, and I hate that map videos aren't introduced, but they got to rely on some luck to get them moving forward in that. But I will give them credit, though, because while they did not have the greatest run through Vegas, I think it was honestly just due to some unfortunate mishaps, maybe some losses. I actually remember the stat. They were the only team, I think, in the entirety of the Call of Duty World League. Maybe I'm not really sure about ANZ, but they were the most consistent team to me during the run in Black Ops 3 when they had Looney on the roster, because I believe in Season 2, they were above 500 in every single game mode. Nobody else did that. Even whenever OG had that incredible run throughout Season 1, they still didn't have above 500 in every single game mode, which to me just goes to show how consistent that core group can be. But like I said, they lose some stuff, they gain Selang, but is it a positive thing in the end? This tournament is big for them. I think if they don't have a great performance here, it might be time to consider making a change in some way. We'll see if that ends up being the case. And one thing that I ended up looking at for MLG Vegas is actually their KDs, and noticed a few errors that they ended up having. Slack carried them quite a bit in Vegas, without question. He had the highest KD in total at all for MLG Vegas. He had a 1.45 KD in Hardpoint, and then he also had the highest KD for them in S&D, and all except for him had around a 0.8 S&D KD. So you kind of get a little bit of an idea. Slack did a great performance, but none of them really could kind of carry the load after that, which has been a major issue, obviously, you can kind of see there. So Slack, he's probably going to have a great event again, but it's all about how can the other guys respond, how can they kind of play their roles, make this team better than they were originally on the old Rise team. Last team we have actually for Group C is going to be Team 3G, which actually consists of the roster of Quick Quicker, Niall, Weeman, and Zerg. Now, first off, be completely honest with you, this is probably the team that I know the least about when it comes down to MLG Atlanta. Predictions-wise, I can give you guys some history on these guys, give you a little bit of an idea as to what to expect, some tournament placements and whatnot, but I don't know them nearly as well as I know a lot of other teams. I just want to kind of make that known. So basically kind of a little bit of history as far as where these players have kind of come from. I talked about Zed earlier. Quicker was on the same roster as him throughout Black Ops 3, being on the XL/Hyper Games team. I said they were known as an online team. When it came down to LAN, they never really showed results. Niall played under TCM, and then later was Zerg under LDLC. Yeah, LDLC throughout Black Ops 3. Weeman, I'm not 100% sure if this is the Weeman from back in the day, because there was like a really talented guy named Weeman who was from Europe, I think like during like MW3 days. I'm not sure if it's him or not, but maybe it is. He actually ended up playing with Sam B and Endura during Black Ops 3, who I think those are both guys who now play for the team name known as Imperial with like Shane. And then Zerg played under Riot and TCM during Spidey times during Black Ops 3, and I believe this is true. I really should have looked this up, but I didn't. I believe he played with Shawnee, who's now in Elevate. I think they played under Riot and had a top 3 placement at, what was it? It was a top 3 placement at M2 Pro Peterborough, I think that's what it is. I think I think that's what it was. It was M2 Pro Peterborough. Him and Shawnee played on the same team together. They had like a top 3 placement. That was before both of them got recognized. So I think Zerg is an underage player based on what I've seen, or what I remember. So we'll obviously see how they do. This team actually, G20 London, had a major surprise, and I wasn't really looking at them to make a huge impact whatsoever from my knowledge of the European scene. They actually ended up topping their group and even beating Orbit, which to me probably was Orbit's ego kind of maybe getting tested there a little bit. Like, oh guys, we just lost game 1, don't worry about it. Oh guys, we just lost game 2, maybe we should worry about it. Oh, game 3 is over. Okay, we just lost. Something along those lines. They actually later lost to Elevate EU and Splice to be knocked out. But obviously they showed some potential, right? To beat Orbit and to beat their entire pool is pretty impressive, although it was an EU-only event. Still got to give them a little bit of credit. It seems that MLG 2Ks that they can make it far, but they always end up losing in the matchups versus the top 4 in Europe. So they constantly have issues with Infuse. They constantly have issues versing off against Splice or Orbit or anything like that, or Infuse. So it seems they can make it far, but when it comes down to facing off against the top teams, the top dogs in Europe, they can never really make it out of there. So that's this is about all my knowledge of the Team 3G roster. As of this kind of coming up, their team name might have changed. I know they're still looking for an organization, so if they're under a different name, I do apologize for that, but they were known as 3G if it hasn't changed by then. So as far as my Pool C predictions are considered, I am going to be having Cloud9 actually come out on the #1 spot. I think they can definitely take up a match versus Elevate. I think they can definitely take down Luminosity Gaming. I've not seen a whole lot from LG. Granted, they had some unlucky things happen when it came down to MLG Vegas, but I still think that Cloud9 is a stronger team in certain game modes versus each other. Then also when you have maps like Retaliation and Crusher, which are half the map pool for S&D, and then Scorch, which they massively struggle in, which I think Cloud9 will probably have a good performance in. There's just a lot of little maps for me that easily could have LG being thrown a different way. So I have Cloud9 coming out in 1. I have Luminosity coming out in 2. I have Elevate EU coming out in 3. Team 3G in 4. And of course, I don't know the open bracket team. I will say though, if I'm an open bracket team, this might be the pool that I want, to be completely honest with you, because if you find LG on a bad map, if you find them in the bad map, you take them out in one of their better game modes, you can start to make a run versus them. Elevate EU, I think, is probably one of the more consistent teams when it comes down to Europe. Of course, they're a top 3 European team. It's not going to be easy to face off against them. And then if Cloud9 doesn't have a good performance, in their uplinks, if you find them, maybe winning one of the first 2 game modes, you can find yourself up 2-1 with a hard point coming up, and say you win something, or maybe you win a nice game 5 or something like that. Like I said, if I'm an open bracket team, this is the pool that I want to be in for sure. I think there could definitely be a case for the open bracket team who comes through this pool to maybe make it out. I think this is probably the highest percentage that an open bracket team coming into it should have, but obviously depends on what open bracket team ends up kind of being placed into this pool. But yeah, guys, that's going to do it for my Group C predictions. Feel free to let me know down in the comments what your guys' thoughts are on my personal predictions. Do you have something a little bit different? Do you have something similar? What team you think you can make it through the open bracket? And maybe just give some thoughts on either of these teams. Who you think has a potential to maybe shine? Maybe some star players from either team who you think can make a name for themselves here. So yeah, guys, that's going to do it for this video. Group D predictions are coming up soon. If you guys haven't checked it out already, make sure to check out my Group A and Group B predictions, which are going to be down in the description below. Friends, I will see you all later. Have a fantastic day, and until next time, peace out.